Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Green Chat. We're going to take a closer look at an upcoming MMO, Pantheon, Rise of the Fallen. My name is Cleeze, and let's get started. Alright guys, welcome back to Green Chat, where you guys can ask me questions and I give you my opinion to hopefully formulate your own on Pantheon, Rise of the Fallen, an upcoming MMO. Today, we're going to start with, we have some more questions from you guys, so we're going to knock into those. But before we begin, I wanted to just at least cover again what Green Chat is, or the purpose of Green Chat, because people are jumping in at different points and asking me questions about it. So Green Chat's just my way of supporting Pantheon. So again, this is all just totally my opinion. It's just to kind of give you guys something to check out that's Pantheon related on a weekly basis while the game is in development, because there is some time left in development for that to boil. In any case, today we're going to kick it off with some questions from you guys. And let us begin. Okay, so first up we have a question from Ash Moharg. Now, some of these questions I've already kind of covered in previous videos, but as I'm going along, I think my basis is expanding, or not my basis, my understanding of what's going on is expanding. The more time I spend with Pantheon, you know, we go on long walks on a beach. Sometimes we sit by a campfire and tell each other our deepest fears, what truly can set us apart from the crowd. But so if I'm covering something too much, I apologize, but I feel like this is a pretty good question, and it was asked of me, so I will talk about it. Also, ooh, you know, now that I think about it, I did cover this. It was more of a forum post, but this is actually a question from one of you guys, so I'm going to cover it again anyways, really quick or really slowly, depending on how fast this goes. So the question is from Ash Moharg. Ash Moharg is asking, what I'm really curious about is the balance between group and solo play. I totally understand and applaud that Pantheon is wanting to bring the multi back into MMOs. Multi, you know. And I applaud the decision, but he applauded twice. That's sick. But sometimes you just find yourself alone. Maybe your friends and guildies won't log in for an hour, maybe. Maybe I don't have time to do anything with myself. Maybe I don't have anything to do anything meaningful group-wise. I just have half an hour to play before I go to work. Whatever the case may be, will Pantheon offer anything for me meaningful to do for those times when soloing is more or less my only option? Crafting, sure. Harvesting, sure. But adventure-wise, will I have options? So Ash Moharg, yes, you will. In the beginning, maybe not so much. So I looked into this one a little bit. I kind of responded to you on forums that I said I was going to kind of dig through it more. So I went through some of the older titles they've put out, and some of the classes in those titles. So there will be soloing in this game. It just might not be what people really expect. So certain classes will not be able to solo. If you're, if you find yourself that you'll be in this position, where you only have a couple 30 minutes, or you're gonna feel like you might be, at least the time zone you're in, or maybe most of your friends play on like the eclipse of your playtime, so you only get like an hour or two with them of the 5 hours of your playtime, or you only get 30 minutes a day, or whatever the case may be. The class you choose really will assist you in making the game more accessible to you, or meaningful in any way you want to look at it, outside of crafting and harvesting. So let's use a druid, for example. Druids will be able to snare. They'll be able to solo rather well at higher levels. Now in the early levels, you're going to struggle no matter what class you play. For the most part, it'll go really slow if you're playing by yourself, and it'd be way more beneficial to group with others. That being said, at higher levels, it also is way more beneficial to group with others, but it's way more effective soloing the higher you get, depending on your class. Like a necromancer, a druid, potentially a bard, ranger. You know, you see where I'm going. These are the classes that can slow enemies or root enemies, and it can also do a decent amount of damage to enemies, to give you options for solo play. So with that being said, is that really going to be entertaining to you? I think it will. Personally, to me, I mean, I've dealt with this before, playing in the older games, especially EverQuest, where you're sitting sometimes in a group queue trying to get into a certain party, a really rare camp. And you got to keep your inner, you know, you're not just going to sit there unless you're chatting with people, but if you want to keep yourself entertained by just soloing a mob here or there, you can do it. It's definitely doable. Just with some classes, like maybe, you know, they might kind of change it up a little bit, make other classes more achievable to do this. It's definitely gonna be inefficient. But like a rogue or a warrior or a monk is, you know, monk might be great, but certain classes just won't have the same options as soloing as other classes. But in group play, they definitely have their place, and they're super effective. Every class is going to be super effective in a group, pretty much. Some more than others, and then some classes are going to be more effective in the solo arena, some more than others. So yes, you will definitely have options besides crafting and harvesting, sir. Again, though, you will be limited to what class you play depending on how awesome you are at soloing, and also your character skill and level, etc., stuff like that. And to round that out, a lot of the quests you'll be doing in the game, there's a lot of times where you have to, like, you know, camp things in the game. That's another thing too you can be doing for 30 minutes, is logging in to check your camp. There's a lot of times where you're going after a really specific drop from a really potentially rare mob that isn't necessarily that difficult, but will have something that you really want for a quest, or probably for a quest, or maybe for a craft, something you're trying to craft, stuff like that. Next up, we have a comment from Briggs30. This isn't so much a question, it is just a comment, but he has a couple of things he mentions in here that I wanted to cover. So let's see here. One thing is this game's release. So a lot of people are thinking 2020, a lot of people are thinking 2017. It's 2018, or is it? A lot of people are thinking 2018, a lot of 2019, whatever the case may be. So the game is going to be coming out in a while. Now, those of us that have pledged will obviously be in there sooner than others. So depending how you feel about it, that's where you're going to be at with it. But it is probably going to be a good shake. Now, I've had a couple messages like, hey, this is not coming out for a while. Why are you getting so hyped about it? Or, you know, what's the whole purpose? And really, again, my purpose in here is to give you guys something Pantheon related once a week while the game is in development. I'm not trying to hear to be like, yeah, it's coming out in like 20 seconds. Oh, you know, I'm just trying to give you guys something where you can go to YouTube and, hey, there's Pantheon. So I have no delusions that the game might come out in 2020. I'll be playing in the alpha, hopefully. I've pledged to that point, so I'll be in there, and it'll be fun to kind of, I mean, it'll be NDA'd, but I will be able to carefully walk around that one, I'm sure, to give, you know, stuff to you guys, hopefully. So that was one comment. So the release of this game, the hype around the game, you know, kind of chill out, guys, take a breather. It's going to be a bit, yeah, take the breathers, but it's still nice to have something to at least Pantheon related to dig through on a weekly basis, I think, or even on a daily basis. I know they put out their newsletters every month, which are really awesome. The recent one was really cool, especially over the elves, but you know, those are like, you're like waiting, like refreshing what, you know, when's it coming this month, or especially the streams are really exciting too. But so yeah, another thing he mentions is about PvP players and servers. I've mentioned this before. There will definitely be a PvP server. Brad has specifically mentioned this, where on that server you are PvP enabled and you can fight anybody. Those servers are usually it's a different game entirely. Obviously, PvP brings a whole new aspect to any game for that matter, but it's different in the PvP sense than any other game out right now where PvP is included. Usually they're very team-based, like this faction versus that faction, or there's 3 factions, or it's guild versus guild. PvP servers in Pantheon are going to be very, you can just straight up probably kill anybody. So make good friends or enemies, you know, keep which one closer, you decide. So just wanted to bring that up again. So PvP definitely part of the game. There'll be their own PvP servers, there'll be PvE servers, and that's pretty much how I'm going to deal with that. And there will be instances of PvP on PvE servers. I don't want to go too much on that. I should almost reference my previous video where I go through a bunch of that, but there's like, you know, arenas and whatever the case may be as far as PvP goes. But again, this is more of a PvE centric game, but they will be putting out a PvP server, so PvPers unite. It's going to be pretty cool if you're into that, from what I've seen. So let's continue. I just wanted to bring up those points. Thought it was pretty useful. Okay, next up we have a question from Heather Snow. Heather Snow is saying, I'm really hoping that there's some kind of support for role players And whether that's something in the default UI or a mod, I don't care, but something that would at least allow people to flag themselves as role players would be ideal. I know WoW is evil, but there's a mod for it called TRP3 that's really quite amazing. Not only can you let other people with the mod know you're a role player, you can notify them at a glance that you're currently in character, and you can write a description of what your character looks like. Since the in-game character has some obvious limitations, I'm pretty convinced that this is the only reason why anyone in the game RPs at all. Role-playing is definitely going to be, or play a major role in Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. Guarantee a lot of players will be into role-playing, and it will definitely be a function that will be incorporated in the game. I can almost guarantee it. In previous titles, I didn't play much of Vanguard, but at least in EverQuest, you could even flag yourself as a role player. Your name would change to a different color, would go purple. So anybody seeing you in the world could be like, oh, that's a role player, or they'd even, just by approaching you, know that you're role playing. Also, it would make your, I think your location anonymous, it would make your level anonymous, and your class anonymous. So you could join a group, potentially, and people would have to interact with you more. You couldn't find out, you'd have to, as far as interacting with other people, you had to be much more realistic in the sense that you actually had to ask them the questions in the RP sense to figure out the information you needed from them as far as, you know, why they were where they were, what they were doing, and stuff like that. And potentially you could like join up and go on an adventure together or something in the RP realm of sense. And that's pretty much what I would expect. Actually, that's definitely what I would expect in Pantheon, is them to easily put something function in that, or put something like that into their game, to easily flag yourself as a role player, easily notice other people that are role playing, and encourage or put blocks in the game that encourage you to almost role play. Like you can't cheat around it, so to speak, because you don't know certain information about the other guy or other person in the role playing sense. So expect it. Expect that role play in Pantheon. Next, we have a question from Robert. Robert is asking, this is kind of a personal question, but maybe it's to gauge my perception for what I'm doing right now, detailing Pantheon Rise of the Fallen to you guys. So Robert's asking, I'd like you to expand on your thoughts about challenges within a game. What are some examples of things that 100% of player base should be able to achieve? What should 50% of the player base be able to achieve? 25, 10, 2%, because last time I only really referenced 0.02%. Finally, how do you think they can effectively mix some of these stratas of activities into the game without more difficult stuff simply being tackled on in-game content? Put another way, how can you allow players to differentiate themselves along the journey, not just at its end? So let us begin. Simply, let's do an example of something that 100% of the player base should be able to achieve, get max level. In Pantheon, I think that'll be more of a struggle than people would expect, or do expect. That's what I expect. But yeah, get max level in the game on any given class or tune. That would be 100%. What would I like to see 50% of the population be to achieve or be involved in? I would like to see 50% of the population to at least achieve one, or participate in a raid and kill something in a raid setting at least once. You guys probably, most people, if you actually look at the censuses of most games, would be surprised at how few people actually raid. I know the last video I was kind of harping on raiding and like, it's so boring and leveling is the everything. But I mean, personally, I really enjoy raiding. I do enjoy leveling too. I'd like them both to be in a game, but I think 50% of the population should achieve at least raiding in some sense. Now, not clear every raid or all that stuff like that, but at least participate in a raid and win. Now, as far as what I understand, there might be raids at subset levels, you know, like level 20, 30, 40. There might be points where you need to participate in a raid at not max level, which they've spoken on it. There's not really been anything shown on that, but I'm leaning to think that they might put something like that in the game, which is pretty cool, especially with their II and how it works. You know, a lot of people's concern is like, why can't a bunch of level 50s roll in and just like cream a level 20 raid mob? Is, you know, if they do roll in there, the AI will be like, whoa, and then run away or something, or do some kind of escape, or call in more buddies to make it like impossible or something. So you can't just like not cream. So you can't just go through and just farm all these lower level raids, get all the loot, and sell it on the auction house, whatever you want to do. Or sell it in trade chat because there's no auction house. Just kidding. Actually, we don't know if there's an auction house. There probably will be one. Sorry. You guys heard that comment. That is the previous video. So, how about 25%? 25%, I would hope they'd be able to log into the game. No, I'm kidding. So 25%, what do I think 25% would be a good cue or mark for those guys? I think a really good point for that would be, let's say, collect all spells in the game for a given class. Granted, if some of them cannot be purchased, you have to go out and do quests for them or other ways of achieving those. So 25% have a full spell book or a skill book or whatever that goes around to say. I'm not sure how melee exactly can work. They may be called spells or abilities. We'll see. But I think a full spell book, 25%, 100%. Should be able to, that's a lot of percentages. I think 25% of the population should at least be able to fill their spell book out, and that would be pretty jazz and cool. Now that might sound crazy, like how could you not get all the abilities in the game? Or how is only 25% only going to get that? Just remember, some spells are going to be quests. They're going to be in some deep dungeon where you got to complete some tasks for some guy to do some crazy stuff. I mean, there's some pretty rad spells, at least in previous titles. I'm pretty sure Pantheon's going to boast some pretty awesome spells as well, including using the colored mana system, which I haven't even covered yet. I'll probably have to cover that later. It's not super crazy, but it's definitely something cool that will expand among classes and make spells more difficult to get and more rare and have a little special niche to them. So yeah, 25% full spell book. Boom. How about 10%? 10%, I would say epic weapons. Let's go. That might be bold, maybe not. I'm not sure. Epic 1.0s, 10% of the population, I think would be totally awesome. I think that's a pretty good number. I know they're going to be really hard to get, take a lot of work, and take a lot of time. If they do have them in the game, which I'm pretty sure they will, that would be my 10%. Sub 2%, what do I think about this? I would say I hope 2% of players are on the cutting edge of clearing content. That's being max level, gonna have to be fully geared, and clearing the most difficult content in the game. I think it's gonna be super hard and take a lot of time to get to that point. Both of those factors are gonna be gating players. It's my hope that that's what 2% would be. Now that number might feel a little low to some people, but if you look at current titles right now, players on the cutting edge of content, killing it before it's nerfed. I don't think there's gonna be a lot of nerfs in this game. That's what they've got to remind ourselves. Players killing content on the cutting edge before nerfs is usually really low. 5% of the overall population of these games is very small, around 2 to 5%. I think 5 is being generous. I think 2 is being generous in some senses, but where people genuinely go through, do not get carried, and kill this content on the cutting edge. Where in Pantheon, I don't foresee them really nerfing anything at any point during a release of content. So if they release a raid, they're not going to like roll it out in a couple months later, lower the difficulty, stuff like that. It's going to remain the same difficulty throughout its entirety, unless of course we gain some levels and like stuff like that with an expansion or something. So that's would be my 150, 25, 10, 2% breakdown of just some things that I think would be achievable by most players and how it really should tier out and what probably they should shoot for. And that's not to say, at least for the 2%, I know probably a very large group of people are going to be working towards clearing everything in the game. And that's not to say, you know, probably a ton of people are going to raid in Pantheon. I know 2% sounds like a really small factor, but that's just the people that actually win and clear it. I mean, a lot of friendly guilds or not so hardcore guilds, you know, just like to tinker around with the easier raids or, you know, the raids that challenge them. They don't necessarily need to be logging in, you know, 8 hours a day, 24 hours on the weekends, putting in the time and the effort to do what's required to take down these really challenging encounters, which usually sounds crazy, but it's awesome that they put these in the game. So you always have something you're striving towards. That means that 98% of the population is always going to be able to log in and work towards something. Not even just in raiding, but You know, because some of these raids require factions, they require keys, they require all sorts of stuff that really bring you to different parts of the world, keep you engaged, keep you entertained, keep you having fun, keep you having adventures with your buddies. So that's why I think the 2% is really important, to be that small and to not get nerfed, to make it bigger. Because once that means that 2% of the people in this game will win, or they'll beat it and they'll be like, I did everything. And that means 98% of the people will constantly be striving for that, to be that 2%. Okay, and to wrap up Robert's question, how can you allow players to differentiate themselves along the journey and not just in the end? So the progeny system, hopefully I'm saying that correctly, is something that once you hit max level, you'll be able to kind of like have a kid in the game. Hopefully you guys think that's awesome, because what? But no, basically your character will be reborn as a level 1 character, so pretty much your kid potentially. They're going to go into more detail on this, but actually, you know what? I feel like I should almost cover this. So the progeny system, players will be able to retire high-level characters and then create their children as new characters. But these new characters, the progeny, will have certain abilities, stats, etc., that make them slightly yet noticeably better than a completely brand new character, but not to the point that that it unbalances things. So that's not before the end, but sort of in a sense, it's kind of a weird way to achieve that. To achieve, you know, meeting the criteria of your question. So some people will be able to differentiate themselves the second time around as a progeny character, and I wouldn't let that worry you as far as being OP. I'm sure it will just be a little flair, some kind of flair that really makes you stand out like, oh, this guy's experienced. This is not his first time around the pony yard where we walk our ponies. Another way players can differentiate themselves along the way or along the journey would be raids at lower levels. So it's going to be probably pretty challenging in the sense at level 20. One way you can differentiate yourself is by stepping up to the plate and let's say leading a raid at level 20. It takes a lot of work and coordination, it takes a lot of patience, and it takes a lot of leadership to pull something like that off. That's just, some people are really good at it, some people struggle with it, and I think it's really awesome the people that do struggle with it give it a shot and do their best. And usually it works out fine if you just, you know, put the stone to the grinder or put the blade to the grinding stone to achieve that. And that would be another way for you to differentiate yourself along the journey for sure if you did some type of raid activity. Another way you could differentiate yourself along the journey would be, as far as, you know, there's a very vertical way to improve your character by gaining levels. But I think in Pantheon, I could almost, you know, there's a lot of I thinks because it's really just opinions, but in Pantheon, there'll be many ways to laterally improve your character through trade skills and crafts, being able to harvest certain things, working on certain reputations, and things along those lines, which will give you access or benefits that not many other people have access to. And that would be another way you can really set yourself apart. You know, people will be like, oh man, where'd you get that? And you'd be like, well, I've worked on these quest lines over here, not quest lines, but I've worked on this reputation over here, or I've been, you know, working really hard on my crafting skills, and this is what I can do with them, and that will definitely set you apart. They'll probably have pets in the game, so maybe there'll be a sense of you taming something or working on a really hard drop to get a really special pet. You can walk around with your little kitty cat, and that can make you special too. Other than that, though, I think that would cover, as far as what we know, ways to differentiate yourself. So hopefully I answered your question. Robert, as always, was a pleasure. I enjoyed myself answering your question all by myself. All right, guys, I hope you made it this far. If you did, nice work. So I've gotten a couple of questions from you guys as far as, in a previous video, I had mentioned that how is the community going to, along the lines of police itself? And I was going on about how in Pantheon, your choices that you make, especially like grieving choices, will have a lot of consequences in the sense that there is no instancing and stuff like that in Pantheon. So if you go and make a fool of yourself, that will affect your reputation on the server. And when I was going on about that, I had mentioned that I had done something at one point, at least in EverQuest, to really tarnish myself. And I've gotten questions on what that actually was. So I'm going to share that right here. Hopefully we have time for it at the very end. So if you are like, this is stupid, I will talk to you later, and thank you for watching. Go ahead and like and subscribe if you like what you saw, and I'll see you again really soon after I tell you the story. So what I had done was I played a ranger in EverQuest, which was a not so wanted class, so I'm kind of at the bottom of the barrel as far as like what's wanted. I feel like they're going to go a little different direction in Pantheon, and as far as the hybrid classes were kind of a really niche position, especially if you weren't in any really large raiding guild, which I wasn't. So there was a raid, I think it was in Plains of Power. There was a raid in an instance, and there was this really cool guild, now that I think about it now, called the Silver Hand. And what they did was, most guilds back in those days had a full roster, and raids were humongous, you know, like 40. I can't even remember really how many people there was, but there was a lot of people in these raids, so your guilds were massive, and you needed like tons of healers, a lot of DPS, and they all had to be really good geared, and raids took a really long time, so it was very difficult to run a full rostered guild. So what the Silver Hand decided to do, I think there was like about 20 of them, what they would do is they would recruit from trade chat, and each one of them would lead a subset group. I didn't know this at the time, but so what they would do was there was the main tank. They filled all the main primary roles with their classes, and then each one of the Silver Hand would be in a group that would then control the raid. And back in those days, there was no like raid group. You were in a group of 6, and there was like 8 groups of 6, and you all did one. So they had like a kill group. They had like right. So basically, you get the point. Communicating between each other was not very simple. It was very difficult to organize and run it. There was no Ventrilo, there was no chat, anything like that. It was all through text. So the main members in each group were kind of like the, I don't know, like colonels or something, whatever you want to call it as far as like hierarchy goes. But they were the, let's say, lieutenants or something. And then there was one commander. So there's a commander, there's a command group, and then a bunch of subset groups that would follow commands from the main party. When we finally got into the raid room, they announced the raid loot rules. And that was pretty much that, I forget exactly the stances, but basically if you rolled 1 through 100, all of their guild mates got a plus 20 to their roll by default. And that was their way of, you know, they're doing all the work. You're here as kind of like peons, which was the case. They did most of the work to get us there with all the strategies and stuff like that. And that was that. So I didn't know at the time, though, that they had one member from the Silver Hand in each group. So when I saw the root rules, I was like, oh my gosh, you serious? And I started chatting with my group, saying this is super stupid. Not stupid. I was just kind of like, you know, like just kind of being like, guys, this is, look at this dork, you know, kind of bad mouthing the main leader of the Silver Hand for these loot rules, which now looking back on it, they were totally reasonable. Given how much work they were putting into it and stuff like that. As you know, they were trying to progress, and right, you get it. So what they did was, yeah, I sat there and battle map. I was just like going off for a while, and then some people were kind of playing along, but I think they knew somebody's in the group, and they were kind of like trying to hide it from me. And then eventually I got a whisper from the main guy saying like, oh, like, what, you think we're trash, bro? Or he said something. The main raid leader guy whispered me, and or sent me a towel, and I was like, oh gosh. I was like, oh. And then like this is in the middle of fighting. He whispers me in the middle of fighting the main guy, and then what he decided to do was kick me out of the group when the boss was at 20%, and I was like, oh god. Anyways, so he kicked me out of the group when it was at sub 20%, and I was just like, oh my gosh. And then what I pretty much did then was like, dude, I'm like so sorry. I was just trying to be cool with my group. I had no idea. I think you guys are really cool. I was kind of like lying through my pants, but he eventually let me back in, but I did get blacklisted from raiding with the Silver Hand in the future, and he did give me a chance to roll the loot, which I didn't win, but yeah, so that was the consequence of that. So I never got to raid with the Silver Hand again, because they were like, this guy, no thank you. And that was it. And that was the only really terrible thing I ever did. I don't know if that was a good story or not, but that was it. I know that wasn't too crazy of a story, but that's just an example of something that can happen in the game that really has a lasting consequence. I badmouthed these guys right in front of them accidentally, and they blacklisted me forever from raiding with them ever again. I raided with some other groups, but yeah, that group was awesome, and they ran often, and it really screwed me in the sense of my character's progression, because, you know, on the off night where you didn't get to raid with your guild, I could have gone and raided with those guys, no problem, whenever they're going, and they went often as well. That was another cool thing about them. So, yeah, that is what I did, and I still feel bad about it to this day. All right, guys, and with that, we're going to end it there. If you have any questions for me, please leave them in the comments below. If you like what you saw, go ahead and like and subscribe to get any notifications for future uploads. And again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again really soon.